He's been making headlines for days for his newly published book, Mr. Potts and Me. And in this edition of Quintin Reports, Damon Fordham talks to me about his new book, Growing Up in Mount Pleasant, and his love for teaching. Well, Damon, listen, I've known you for a decade now, but I haven't seen you in a while.
Well, hardly anybody has, because I've been so busy with teaching, writing, and lecturing, and maintaining a relationship and so forth. So very few people have seen me these days outside of those circles.
Well, tell me, how are you doing?
I am doing just quite well. I'm continuing to teach. I've just finished my most recent book, which is getting a lot of publicity these days. I'm very happy in my personal life as well as my professional.
Everyone knows Damon Fordham as a professor, a historian, and an author. Describe to me, who is Damon Fordham?
Damon Fordham is a writer, a teacher, a lecturer who goes around trying to not only educate people in the colleges, but also outside of the colleges who need the most.
Right. Well, put on your memory hat for me. I understand that you were born in Spartanburg, but were raised in Mount Pleasant.
Right. I was put up for adoption shortly after my birth for reasons it's sort of best not to get into here.
I understand.
But I was put up for adoption, and I was raised by Pearl and Abraham Fordham of Mount Pleasant. She was a nurse at MUSC, and he was a teacher at the old Lang High School in Mount Pleasant for 30 years. Now, my mother told some stories too from time to time, but my dad in particular, he loved to tell stories, and those stories made a big impression on me in wanting to learn about and study history.
I understand before you began researching and teaching, you actually had a temporary job in radio. Talk to me about that.
Okay, now that's interesting, because when I got out of college, I wanted to do some radio commentary. But the first time I did that, I got sort of the bum's rush, so to speak. They sort of brushed me off a bit. So then I took the idea to a local newspaper called the Coastal Times, which was then under Mignon Clyburn, who's now at the FCC.
Right.
So I did a column called It's Like This, where I mixed little-known history with current commentary, and that did pretty well.
Wow.
So ironically, David Mack of WP was then at WPAL Radio. He had me come over and do his show Drive Time Dialogue at the time, along with Claudia Collins.
Right.
And I did a number of those, and that led to me recording these little segments of Black history that periodically played on WPAL until the station was discontinued.
Right. Well, listen, you also, from what I understand, that you became interested in research after the whole adoption situation. Talk to me about that.
Well, actually, it was even before that.
Okay.
Because at one point I worked at the Charleston County Library when it was still on King and Calhoun downtown.
That's right.
And I worked in the microfilm department.
Right.
And while looking through microfilms, I would find all these fascinating old newspaper stories that the history books missed. And I would take that information that hardly anyone knew about and write about it and speak about it.
Right.
And so it was sort of like when I was a kid, I used to love to go in the backyard and dig for buried treasure.
Yes.
It was the same way when I was digging through these microfilms. I was finding these treasures and sharing it with the world.
Well, I also understand that you have written several books over the years.
3.
Wow, that's awesome.
Those were the ones that were published.
Yes. Well, listen, how did the book business by you?
Okay. Now going back to when I did the newspaper column, I wanted to I always wanted to put those in a compilation in a book, right?
Yes.
But then as time went on, I did a number of research projects that were quite interesting.
Yes.
And so my first book was called True Stories of Black South Carolina, which was a compilation of those research projects written in layman form, as well as some of the old newspaper columns.
Sure.
Okay, that was a success. So that came to the second book, Voices of Black South Carolina, which came out the next year in 2009.
Wow. Well, explain Mr. Potts and Me.
Oh, that's the current book. And
yes.
Here it is. Now here's the 5-minute backstory.
Sure.
Okay, the young man on the cover is myself in 1972, right before my 8th birthday. Okay, and at the time my father died in 1984, about 7 years after that, on February the 14th, 1991, 7 years after his death.
Okay.
I thought about what a tragedy it would be if his stories were to die with him. So I went home and wrote down as many of his stories as possible in this notebook.
Sure.
And I looked at that and I said, hey, this would make a good book, but how would I get anybody to want to read it?
Sure.
So I thought about myself as a child and how much I loved his stories.
Yes.
Then there was the man that you see in the background is Mr. Walter Snipe, who was a major figure in Mount Pleasant, born in 1896 and died in 1973. He invented a ship caulking device at the Naval Shipyard. He was a local businessman with several businesses. He owned a lot of property, and he partially raised my mother.
Wow.
When her grandparents died.
Okay.
So he was sort of my surrogate grandfather.
Yes.
So I thought of him and I thought of Dad, and I combined him into this character of Mr. Potts because, as you know, there was a time when just about every community had these wise old sages in the community that was pretty much imparted wisdom. They were sort of like the unofficial mayors of the community.
Absolutely.
That's gone in many of our communities these days. So I figured I would preserve my father's stories and preserve the importance of men like that in this book, and thus you have Mr. Potts and me.
You have a love for teaching.
Yes, I do.
When you think of teaching, what comes to mind?
Imparting knowledge to people who need it.
Yes.
And as well as personal encouragement.
Right.
Because as you probably know, I taught for 3 years. I taught at the GED. I taught GED for 3 years at the Charleston County Jail. Okay, and through that I got 28 prisoners to get their GEDs.
Wow.
And in that process, one thing that I found interesting was that so many of them, as is the case of some of the students that I have now, had been led to believe, even by their parents as well as their peers, that they were hopelessly ignorant and could do nothing but criminality. Because you have a lot of situations today where the mothers are angry with the fathers, or the fathers are angry with the mothers, and if the child resembles that mother or father, the parent will say, you're going to be just like your mother who's no good, or you're just going to be like your daddy who goes to jail. And the children get that in them, and they wind up fulfilling that prophecy. People wonder what happens.
Right.
So I taught a lot of individuals like that and managed to convince some of them that they can get their GEDs, and they were so shocked that they could. And
right.
Of course, that not only changed their outlook on academics, but
right.
also changed their outlooks on themselves.
Well, you have been a historian, a teacher,
right,
and an author.
Right.
What is your favorite and why?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, they're all the same.
Okay.
Because they're all about the same thing, but trying to use the knowledge of what happened before as a means of encouragement to do better.
Yes. Well, you also have met a whole lot of high-profile people during your lifetime.
Yes, I have.
Including Halle Berry, Jesse Jackson,
right.
Andrew Young. Who made
your research?
Thank you. Who's your favorite and why?
Well, with no apologies to people of certain political persuasions,
okay.
The current president.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. Because I've met a number of political people over the years who were very arrogant and rude and quite nasty, and who later got their comeuppance in life, who shall be nameless.
Okay.
All right? And now I met the current president, in 2007 at Burke High School. I understand you were there for that same occasion.
I was.
Now, if you'll remember, right before then Senator Obama spoke, there was this young lady who got up and made this wonderful opening speech to that occasion. And when Mr. Obama went on stage, he made sure that audience acknowledged the intelligence and articulation of that young lady, and that they gave her a hand.
Sure.
And can you imagine what impact that has on that young lady, and how much that would inspire her to do something great? Because in the same way I just talked about people who, because of misinformation and
sure.
negativity, inspire people to do the wrong things, this kind of stuff is what inspires people to greatness.
Yes.
So I was impressed by that. Then afterwards, I got a chance to speak with him, and I told him how much I enjoyed his book, Dreams from My Father. And he said, well, do you have it with you? I said, huh? And he said, do you have it with you? I would like to sign it. And
yes.
I said, well, I didn't think I'd get close enough to you for you to do that. And he said, well, listen, I'm going to be in Charleston X amount of times in the future, so come by my office on President Street downtown, and we'll sign, and I'll sign it for you. Well, of course, the next time I saw him, 5,000 people were there, so that didn't happen. But still, to see a man of that position act with that kind of humility toward people that he didn't know impressed me.
Okay.
Because I've seen people who are not nearly in his position act with extreme arrogance, you see. And so it taught me a very important lesson, that it's great to, if you're in a position, to use that position to inspire those who come after you, because it's better to be honored as an elder statesman than to be dismissed as a bitter old man.
Describe to me the following in one word.
Okay.
Research.
Research is when you when you try to find accurate information for behind things that you may have heard.
Yes.
Because you see, one of the things that disturbs me as a historian is that there's this cottage industry of misinformation, especially when it comes to black history. You have a lot of this foolishness that's out on the internet with no foundation in actual reality, such as the quote-unquote Willie Lynch letter and the idea that the word picnic came from people picking an N-word to lynch, and this really stupid one about the President of the United States before George Washington was a black man at a time when black people couldn't even vote. Hello, how could you run a country when you can't even vote? All this foolishness that people are actually taking seriously. You know, to people in my profession, it does it a great disservice. So one of the things that I try to get people to understand is you cannot look up something on the internet and think you've done research. You have to dig deep and deal with primary sources, the origin of where this stuff came from.
Yeah.
In other words, in the words of Festus, who on the old show Gunsmoke, how you know the fellow who wrote the reading right? So you know you have to make sure that. So you have to make sure that the information that you're doing has some foundation and fact, or is just something that appeals to your emotions.
Absolutely. One word to describe teaching.
Let's see, teaching, giving.
Okay.
Because what you're doing is giving information and encouragement to people when you teach.
One word to describe history.
Oh wow. Facts.
Yes.
Basically, because you have to know the fact. Because see, I think the Roman philosopher Cicero said it best. He who is ignorant of what happened before he is born will forever remain a child.
One word to describe Mount Pleasant.
Interesting.
Yes.
Because Mount Pleasant is in an interesting state of transition from its sleepy hamlet that I've described in this book to sort of a mini metropolis.
One word to describe Damon Fordham.
Here. I'm here.
Yeah. Well, listen, what is something that people don't know about you? Because I understand that you love cream of wheat.
You have done your research. Yeah, my grandmother fixed it quite well, and so I have a fondness for that to this day. So that is one thing that most people don't know about me.
Yes. Well, listen, you know, you have written several books. Mm-hmm. You have taught so many classes. Mm-hmm. You have done dozens of research. What is the next chapter for you?
Two things. There's going to be a sequel to this book. It's going to be called American Storyteller that I'm currently working on.
Yes.
Which takes the old man story back to the slavery era.
Okay.
And it takes it all the way up to the boy in the story, myself, you know, a thinly disguised version of myself, up to his adulthood, okay? And so it's going to be this whole continuum where all this storytelling makes this major impact on the people around them. That'll be out hopefully I'm currently working on it now, hopefully it'll be out in 2014, shortly before my 50th birthday.
Wow.
After that, 2015 will be the 100th anniversary of the death of the great educator Booker T. Washington.
Wow.
I'm working on something with that. I'm in communication with his great-great-granddaughter, Sarah Rush, over that issue as we speak. And then in 2018 will be the centennial of the great Frederick Douglass.
Right.
So that'll come after that. But eventually I look to basically go in teaching through the lecture circuit and writing.
Wow. Well, Damon Fordham, it was so good talking to you again.
And Quintin, Washington, it was good talking to you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
Right.
I really do.
Okay.
Thank you.